Sir Julius Vogel, the London Jew who decisively transformed Otago and New Zealand with his visionary policies and ambitious funding schemes.
Julius Vogel lived in New Zealand for just under 20 years and was a Dunedin resident for less than half of that. But in his 8 years as an Otago person, he began the Otago Daily Times as New Zealand's first daily newspaper and got his start as a politician, both locally in the Otago Provincial Council as well as nationally as a parliamentarian in Wellington. It's also claimed that Vogel was the only practicing Jew to have ever become Prime Minister of any country in the world other than Israel. Vogel was born here in Finsbury Circus in central London in 1835 to a Jewish family with Dutch and German origins. But his parents split up when he was young and he was brought up in the house of his grandfather, Alexander Isaac, at Peckham in South London. He left school at 15 to join his grandfather's merchant firm. He also studied assaying at the newly established School of Mines. And then, in 1852, aged just 17, Vogel and a friend decided to emigrate to Australia, where gold had just been discovered in Victoria.
Vogel was never a gold miner, first establishing an assaying business in Melbourne, but then moving from place to place around Victoria, trying to establish himself in various enterprises without much success. Eventually, he became a journalist at Denali and discovered a flair for writing. He also developed a taste for tobacco and fine food and wine, the cause of a subsequent affliction with gout. By 1861, Victoria seemed to be in decline, so Vogel crossed the Tasman to the latest Australasian gold rush boomtown, Dunedin.
He quickly secured a job with a local newspaper, but within weeks, he'd made a partnership with the rival editor of the Otago Witness to begin a daily newspaper in Dunedin. And the Otago Daily Times duly appeared its first issue on the 15th of November, 1861. Julius Vogel was to edit it for the next 7 years.
This role, and his enthusiastic engagement with other local bodies like the Chamber of Commerce, the Benevolent Institution, and the Otago Club, gave him the perfect platform to launch a political career.
Vogel cut his teeth in the Otago Provincial Council as its treasurer, working closely with James McAndrew on ambitious programs of provincial development. He was also elected a member of the House of Representatives in Wellington for Dunedin and became a leading member of the opposition there through the 1860s. But in 1869 he left Dunedin. He had lost the editorship of the Otago Daily Times over his stridently independent views. He took away with him a wife, Mary, the daughter of his neighbour, the architect William Clayton, who he married in a Christian ceremony in 1867.
They were to have 4 children together, and Mary exercised considerable influence over her husband, possibly inspiring his introduction of a women's suffrage bill in 1867. Vogel became colonial treasurer in 1869 and inaugurated the huge program of immigration and public works for which he remains famous.
This bold policy of expansion, funded by international loans, led to a booming economy through the 1870s.
Even more importantly, Vogel's immigration scheme involved the largest influx of new arrivals in the country's history, all with free or subsidised passages, and with the largest proportion of them, nearly a third, destined to arrive in Otago. That massive infusion of population, the immigrant ancestors of thousands of New Zealand families, is Vogel's greatest legacy, along with all the roads and bridges, harbours and railways that were built in that decade of unprecedented growth.
This period was also the highlight of his political career, with 2 stints as Premier and being knighted in 1875. Now, things began to sour somewhat for him in the 1880s, as well as for the country with depression setting in. But for Vogel personally, there was ill health and business difficulties, and he returned permanently to Britain in 1888. Vogel spent his last 11 years here in the village of East Moseley in Surrey, increasingly confined to his wheelchair by his worsening gout and seldom venturing forth in public. But he did return to writing, completing a science fiction novel called Anno Domini 2000, in which he envisaged a future New Zealand in which all the top government posts were held by women. He and Mary had their final years clouded by worries about money, however, living out a life of what you'd call genteel poverty, out of the public eye. His reputation suffered in the economic downturn that followed his loan-induced boom. But as prosperity returned in the 1890s, his policies were seen as visionary, and that tends to be the view that most historians still hold today. Vogel therefore takes his place among the greatest statesmen of 19th century New Zealand. And to find his memorial here in Dunedin, all you need to do is look at all the infrastructure he left behind and trace the descent lines of all those immigrants of the 1870s. He died in 1899, aged just 64, and left an estate valued at a mere £50. He's buried here in the Jewish cemetery in Willesden, London.